Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the 8th episode of Voices for Excellence. How are you? I am your host, Dr. Michael Connor, CEO and founder of the Agile Evolutionary Group. And today's guest has been a longtime friend of mine for, I would say, at least 6 to 8 years. I know specifically my work when I was the chief academic officer in Norwalk, became really close national colleagues when I became superintendent. And now as I'm transitioning into this role, just looking at it from a really high level sense of admiration, right? And let me give you just a quick story of Dr. Jeff Dillon, who is considered and really is, and this is both subjectively and objectively stating that he is one of the most innovative superintendents in the country. And I want to give you context behind that, right? So I remember it was at a conference and we were talking about, who are the superintendents across the country to follow? And I remember I was as a chief academic officer, and Dr. Bill Daggett, a mutual friend and mentor of Dr. Dillon and I, said the most innovative school district in the country is in Idaho. So yes, I am not going to lie. My stereotypes, came up about Idaho. And I'm like, I stopped and I said, how could the most innovative district in the country be in Idaho when it's really only servicing one demographic? Now, again, this was outside stereotypical perception data. So I said, okay, I kept it to myself because as a Black superintendent, I wanted to challenge that. Where are we truly looking at equity variables? When we talk about, the most innovative district in the country, I would expect, one would say that you would see that in our urban districts because of the experimentation that goes on and the continuous looking for innovation for equity, right? So I remember 2 years later, Dr. Jeff Dillon was going to be at the same conference as me. And I'm like, okay, I get to ask him this question. 2 years, people, I waited. Get into the room and Dr. Dillon is speaking and I'm in the front. Everybody knows how I am, Jeff. I have my pen ready. And Dr. Dillon opens up his speech and said, let me clarify something to everybody. Wilder School District in Wilder, Idaho is not all white. I said, all right, that he won me over when he said that. And when he started to unwrap the demographics of his district, and he'll be able to elaborate more, it made me feel that much more shameful. And then I went up to him, gave him a hug, and I said, listen, I am sorry because there were questions that I was about ready to lambaste you with, and you just answered it in the first 20 seconds of your speech. So it is with absolute honor to have Dr. Jeff Dillon, the proud superintendent of Wilder School District 133 in Wilder, Idaho. Dr. Dillon, how are you, my friend?
Doing great, Dr. Connor. Thank you for the opportunity to join you this afternoon or this morning or this evening, wherever you're listening from. But what an opportunity and the partnership we've had for several years of this innovative mindset that we share about serving all students in all capacities and this push for equity for all students. And I appreciate the friendship. I do. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Jeff, the friendship, I've been fond of your work, actually. Elements of when I was a superintendent with my strategic operating plans mirrored a lot of your work, specifically my second SOP that was developed that was more aligned to that reverse engineering. A lot of those concepts around competency-based models that incorporates agency of the student and moving away from the standardization of time really came from your work. So I want to truly say thank you for providing not just a visual model of what it looks like, but also how you actually did the intricacies, the complexities of the finite work to get there. And it was really, really helpful as I constructed my district. So truly appreciate that. But I want to now, just like you clarified, you clarified my stereotype. Please, for my listeners, can you just eradicate, right, the misnomer about Wilder, Idaho, right before we even get into the interview?
Hey, let's begin. We are a rural community. We're only 45 minutes from Boise, Idaho, but we are a high poverty rate community. 100% of our students that come to school here get free breakfast and free lunch. We range between 70 to 95% of our kids, depending on some of the situations within our community, of Hispanic students range from 65 to 90%. A huge data point that has driven a lot of our work is around our mobility of our students. And it's around poverty. It's around migrant work. It's about a community that has a majority of homes being rental homes. We will range anywhere from 25 to 40% mobility from a fall to fall snapshot of students.
Wow.
So it is not a place where you have these multi-generational families that have been here for a long time, and we have a few of those, but they're a small few.
And Dr. Dillon, one thing that I admire about you, right, is that you will hear a lot of people talk broadly about the demographic data, right? Demographic data points that you just listed, especially some of the economic and external variables that when you take in consider a lot of executive leaders do not take that into consideration with the design, right? The design of how they have to basically flip a model to be able to accommodate to those specific demographic and economic needs, or that are actually there, that plays a role into coming into your district. And that's why when we get into later into the interview or to the podcast, is that it's just fascinating that you actually designed in accordance to the needs in the BC stage of education, like 12 years ago. That's like me watching Back to the Future in 1985. That's like, hey, McFly. I mean,
that's right.
Seriously, I mean, we laugh about it, but that is pretty much the correlation of how you design the district 15, 16, 17 years ago, where now you had this vertical competency-based model, where now 5 or 6 years ago, people are saying, yeah, we got to go competency-based model, but you've been doing that 10 years before we even start. That was part of the academic vernacular. So that's why I admire you so much, Jeff, with the work that you did.
Yeah, our iterations through the years, it's interesting how little value we've placed on the competency-based innovation. That was a foundation, but our iterations and our changes that we've made to support that individual student is so much broader than just competency-based.
Yeah.
That helped us launch this, but it took us in many, many different directions to make sure we're meeting the needs of every single student.
Just fascinating, Dr. Dillon. I can't wait just to get down into the podcast, but I can say this, man, you are one bad man, right? So, and when we talk about Back to the Future, I forgot who, it was Michael J. Fox. It was the scientist, right? What was his name? Come on, you gotta help me.
Emmett Brown.
Yes. You are him, right? That was you in Back to the Future, because you saw the vision, right? But you're just well respected, just in a variety of different national circles, regarded in a variety of different aspiring circles where they come in and seek advice and strategies. But when they see you, Dr. Dillon, what is your equity song that defines you? When your teachers, when your principals, your board members, when they see Dr. Jeff Dillon walk in a room, what is that equity song that comes to mind?
I think the equity song, and I mean, it'll be different than probably any other song you've heard, and I'll explain it to you. The song that comes to my mind when I talk about this equity walk we made and this venture is goes back to the Sunday school days when I was a kid. Jesus loves me, and that the song is about the whole, not about the part, but it's about the individual, about me, right?
Mm.
Loves me, and the system needs to love every child. And I don't. The system does not do that. It wasn't created to do that in any capacity. And so that kind of is the song that resonated with me when I read the question. That personalization of everything that we can do for that student is personalized, because that's the care that we put into every single student, and that comes before the system.
When I bring up that equity song, right? And um, Jesus loves me, right? My grandmother, and this is taking us back, right? And I didn't even think I was going to bring this back, but my grandmother and my mother used to sing that song to me. I used to hear that song in church. I know why that Jesus, right? I mean, we're not going to start that here on Voices for Excellence, but yes. And when you think about that, right? And have that to the level of what you're saying, the theme around personalization, that Jesus loves everybody individually. And when that song describes you, they're like, yep, Dr. Dillon cares for every single kid on an individual and personalized manner. You took that, your heart, your purpose, your why, and you started to analyze the demographic data and say, you know what? If Jesus loves everybody individually, and that is my equity stance and song, now I'm going to design a system where Dr. Dillon loves every single student, right? So I just need an amen from the congregation.
And the system has to love the students.
Amen.
So
Praise.
because we can do that and say that individually, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to make sure that you as the leader forces the system to treat the students that same way. You know how you felt, right, when your grandma sang that song, right?
Absolutely.
And how very focused that love was on you, right?
Absolutely.
Can we do that as individuals, but as a system for every single student?
Now, I want to underscore that because my book, it pretty much puts education in totality, right? And just pretty much assessing it, I would say since the separate but equal, when that language was defined, then we can go into the legislative Brown v. Board of Education, still to me, pacified, but now DC stage of education that we see, right? We finally say, hey, you know what? There is a separate but equal out there, because guess what? It actually hit the equal, right? But we're not going to get there. But the BC stage of education before COVID, Jeff, let's just be honest, right? You designed a district before it was even thought about in research papers and white papers. And you were the Lone Ranger. I know this for sure. Conversations, I've heard third party, I've heard it first person from you. You were the Lone Ranger. When you were talking about eliminating assessments when they were just adopting No Child Left Behind policy, where there's that level of rigidity where inequities were built in because of the standardized assessment practices. You got away with that. So this occurred, years ago. But now it must have took years of planning before you even implemented it. It must have had a lot of convincing of board members back then. And we're talking about 25 years ago, 20 years ago, where boards were still debating on, should we have technology in our classrooms? You're talking about move away from the grading system, but how did you do that? How were you thinking AC stage of education in a BC stage model?
So let me begin by giving a brief, synopsis of my history. And surprise, surprise, I was a pastor and youth pastor for 14 years before going into public education teaching. And my first assignment was I had a whole different perspective of students, working with students and empowering students and thinking about students learning and their individual pathways. And so my first assignment was a 7th grade middle school science class.
Mm-hmm.
And we were coming up on the time of year where we were going to let all the students in the humanities class, and I was in a school that was similar to the demographics I'm in now.
Mm-hmm.
The students that were in the humanities class were just happened to be mostly white, by the way. Those students were able to take on a science project for learning. And man, they were excited. It was fun. They were empowered. But the other 6 classes that I had that were just the opposite in the demographics, guess what those students were able to receive that quarter of learning? Here's the book. Turn to page 75.
Yeah.
Let's read this together.
Yeah.
And I sat there, and as a first year teacher, I'm going, what are we doing? I watch these kids excited about learning and doing a project, and thinking every child should have the same experience. And so guess what I did my second year? Every student in my class was given the opportunity to do a science project along with all the other students in the humanities class, because it was right. Absolutely. It was right. So my mindset in education from the very day I started to today has been equity. And looking at the system structures that limit or inhibit the ability for every student to have the same learning opportunities, not just the access, but the learning opportunities to move them forward. And so when I moved into this model and began to, massage the model, I really personalized it for my board.
Yeah.
Where they begin to see how this would impact and benefit for their children.
Yeah.
And they were like, wow, I get it now. I understand that. And getting them on the same page, and then having conversations with parents. And it was really simple. Hey, if I get personalized learning for your child, would you be okay with that? There wasn't a parent that said no. And then when I found out having conversations with parents, guess what parents, a lot of my parents thought? That we were already personalizing learning for students in education.
Yeah.
Oh, I felt horrible.
Yeah.
I felt horrible that's the mindset of a lot of our parents.
And it still exists, Dr. Dillon, still exists.
I know. So really, that was kind of that push. And we took a different pathway. We don't have a huge, staff. I mean, we don't have, thousands of students. Right. We had to make a very quick shift, because we couldn't stay in this middle very long. Because I'm going to tell you, Michael, from the research you've done, before COVID, during COVID, after COVID, I'm going to tell you what we learned, DC time. We're going to lose that in AC time, because the traditional model of education is so powerful.
Correct.
It will suck those organization systems back into
correct
the BC stage.
I just want to touch upon what you stated and highlighted, and then also I would infer how arduous it was for you in the BC stage of education that has instructional and operational systems of the Jeffersonian model. And I'm going to say this eloquently, because people used to get on me when I say this, and they're like, can't you make it more simplistic? But batch industrialization, right? And that's that era of that misconception of parents would think that they're getting a personalized learning model for their kids, but in reality,
Yeah.
it just addresses the whole for Eurocentric students. But one thing I want to just highlight, right? And I just want you to talk about this because it's so relevant for new superintendents or even superintendents that are going back, really utilizing and saying using the source of the crowd, right? Or, the collective knowledge of the crowd, which is your most important customers. But how did you define personalized learning in the BC stage of education? Because I still hear people use the definition of personalized learning, and we're in the first year of the AC stage of education, first typical year since 1819, and we still can't define personalized learning. Even we went through the asynchronous and synchronous cycles of a new business model when we were in COVID. How did you define that, right? How did you define personalized learning in the BC stage of education? And we can't even define it correctly right now.
It was a lot of sitting around with my staff
Yeah.
and really collaborating about the individual student, not about groups of students, not about a whole class, but individual student.
Yeah.
And when you talk about, here is student A, and if we personalize the learning for student A, what system structures are in place now that would limit that student from being supported with a personalized model or tools, instruction, et cetera, for making progress, right? So we had to, and it's amazing. We don't have to look at 30 kids, 40 kids in a classroom, 25 kids. We can look at one student.
Mhm.
And you start with one student and create a model for that one student. And then it's okay, let's layer two students in there. Would the same model then work for two students? Would the same model work for three students? With the same, and so that's really how we had to boil it down to one student by one student by one student.
What I love about that, Dr. Dillon, is you just described a much simplistic way of building a prototype. And the prototype that we're about to move into is that competency-driven model, moving away from traditional standardizations, i.e. time, Carnegie unit, to now students moving through demonstration of skills through this pathway using colors. You'll be able to articulate it, in a much more clear, lucid manner. But when you say one student, two student, three student, building an individual model and incrementally growing, right? I look at my book, moving from micro innovation to serial disruption, right? You were building those micro pieces for a serial disruption. The architectural piece, because you were building those micro innovative components. And now you're looking at them in an interrelated manner. You started to change the architecture, the infrastructure of the education system. Yeah. So I just want to stop there, right, at the architectural level, because you started to talk about it, loosely, but let's get deeper into it. You started looking at eliminating grade structures. You started now looking at personalizing one-to-one pedagogy, one-to-one instruction, and it really was that. You started to move to competency-driven exercises where there were project-based, problem-based activities. How did you now make that so adaptive? How did you start designing for that? If I'm a superintendent or even a chief academic officer that want to create flexible systems and structures like that, where do I start?
That's a great, you have to start with your why.
Yeah.
You do, because you're going to get beat up. You're going to get people that will call you all kinds of names, what horrible things you're doing for kids. But your why can't change.
Yeah.
Your why can't change. Who you are, what you do, why you do it, and why you're in this business.
Yeah.
You know, you have an expectation, and I know you, Dr. Connor, you had an expectation,
Yeah.
right? And when, you know, when the organization didn't have the same expectation you had, right? Right? That's hard. This is hard stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's hard stuff. And I've been blessed to have a team that has, we've been able to develop over the course of time a strong why. And this is crucial because we found out how deep our why went on a couple different state reviews that came in and accreditation reviews that came in. When you meet with students groups and parent groups and teacher groups, administrative groups, board, you will find the same narrative for our why in every single group, every stakeholder group. It's consistent across the board. And that's one thing that came out very glaring in all of our reports was that we're on the same page. And the page is centered around your why. Yeah. It's about every child. And you're going to make it happen no matter what. And so I think it's the why that really has to be in place before you can begin to take those iterative steps. And your team, people buy into the leader and then the vision. Mm-hmm. You know, John Maxwell had in one of his books, I read that and it has resonated with me year after year after year. And I try to share that with all leaders. You can lead with that why, but people have to be able to buy into your leadership. Yeah. And believe in you as the leader, and they're going to get behind you and follow you no matter where that goes, right? Absolutely. They're going to believe in that. So those are, I think, two of the things that have to be in place before you begin to, you know, take those micro steps. And when you begin to take the micro steps that are driven by your why, and your team is synergized around that, you're going to have to create that own pathway for your own organization.
And, you know, I like to always say on the Voices for Excellence podcast series, that is an oldie but goodie, right? That still keeps coming up, Maxwell. I appreciate that. And now, Dr. Dillon, I want to just touch base with you on.
Just in case you want the book, it's right here. I keep it close on my desk.
There you go.
Yep. So,
Dr. Dillon, you're always referencing some research, some book, but now I want to go deeper into what you're researching now. And I don't know if I'm supposed to bring this up or not, but please talk very high level, because I will never forget a conversation that you and I had roughly about this is January. So this was probably November, and you were talking about, and this is why I still admire you so much, always have and always will, is that the model that you have now will be, I would say this, it would be great now for the AC stage of education, because that's what we were actually trying to do. But the conversation that we had a month ago, I don't know if you recall, we were talking about I like to say, and this is using Michael Tushman's work, exploration of the existing business model. Yep. And you started to talk about Wilder 2.0. I called it Wilder 2.0. That's how I'm able to conceptualize it. And when we were talking about this, I'm like, man, we'll be lucky if we get 10, 20% of our education models to where you're at right now, let alone, because of the draconian slides that we've experienced in education, how do we get to that Wilder 2.0 that we were discussing? So just very broadly, right, without going too deep. And I know that you have, your team's going through the work, you're collecting stakeholder engagement group data and all that. Just very high level, because that is exactly what the emergent model in my book, Intentional, Bold, Unapologetic, calls for, that type of model that you're building in Wilder. Can you just talk about it very broadly and abstract?
Yeah, so hang on, because it's actually probably not 2.0. It's probably about 20.256. Because um, we're on a journey. We're not trying to get to a destination, right?
Right,
So
right, right.
that's our model. We know that the world of artificial intelligence has really taken over all the redundant. I can't spit that word out. The If we can write an algorithm for it,
Yeah.
right? Artificial intelligence or computers taking over, operating that pathway. We know that artificial intelligence platforms are here
Hmm.
and they're going to stay.
Hmm.
We began to go look at our students and our staff and our system and say, well, if we were to put artificial intelligence, a platform in the hands of our kids, how would that change our pedagogy? How would that change the mindset of the classroom and the environment of the classroom and the direction the students are taking? So we provided an open AI platform to a group of students in the middle school and a group of students in high school, and literally said, "Go cheat, go cheat. Teach us what we don't know.
Hmm.
Use this as much and as often as you can, and do that for 2 months. Every class, I don't care what it is, and then present to myself and the school board what you learned." And actually, Tuesday night we had two students present to the board their personal findings of the value of an AI platform. It's going to change how we do business in the future. We watched a young man in front of us Tuesday night
Yeah.
that has struggled with reading his whole life. He's a
Yeah.
freshman. He struggles, speaking now and speaking in front of a bunch of people. He struggles with speech and different things, and he took this AI platform and embraced it.
Yeah.
He's
And
become a dynamic writer and a dynamic researcher.
amazing. No, Doctor,
Now, he might have not been a great writer. He's a great writer now, but what's happened is that the writing was the roadblock. If I can remove the I don't care if he uses AI to write. Who cares? Look what else came with that,
and
right?
Dr. Dill, that's why, like, who cares, right? And that's what we need more of in education. But what really captivates me, right? And as you were providing your answer and really just highlighting around the board or you are not given the report of the AI platform or AI integration into your model, your testing pretty much is a really good strategic design thinking strategy of experimentation that you're doing around this AI platform, but you're getting the data, the information from the students, the end user, the customer, the most important customer, which sometimes we fail to negate. So not only are you really bringing in that level of equity, not only are you bringing in that level of experimentation, but what I'm really, really, really happy about is that you basically just said it, the 56 Delta skills that we know about, 2030 from the McKinsey report. And it highlights the 4 domains where you are addressing 2 of those critical domains that are needed in the AC stage of education. So that is very, forward thinking, but it's also equity driven. So we have a surface level definition of what your equity stance and your definition of equity is. But Dr. Dillon, let's just call it out. What is your definition of equity? Because I'm going to start getting into about assessment practices, but I want to build a prerequisite before we actually get into how you actually demonstrated equity through assessment practices. So going back to the outset, what is your definition?
Well, my definition of actually part of one of the questions that we've talked about and we'll talk about, I think, in the future here, is that all means all.
Absolutely.
And we have to be honest with ourselves and look at our system structures
Mhm.
that we are most educators are comfortable with the structure. That's
Absolutely.
why we keep pushing this product down the road. It was easy for us. We understand it. We're knowledgeable about it. And so there, we keep driving it. But the system, I've talked with you, Dr. Connor, multiple times about this, right? The system was never created for equity.
Right.
And if we keep trying to force equitable tools into an inequitable system, we're going to get inequity. You're never going to get to equity if you keep using some of the same structures you're using. You know,
I
and
just
those
want to
systems
interject.
could be, was that?
I want to interject because and this is where I think the level of vulnerability, and I usually do this at least once every episode. So I gotta, I apologize for interjection, but I want
No,
people
don't
to
apologize.
understand that this is leadership. And these are the tidbits that nobody would know this about you. So that's why I want to highlight it. Dr. Jeff Dillon has called me numerous of times and would have very uncomfortable conversations to the normal white educator in our sector. I'm gonna just be honest with you, because there's only two educators, white educators, that have really continuously asked me really hard equity questions from the Black lens: Dr. Jeff Dillon and Dr. Susan Enfield. Those are only two, right? Susan will call me anytime and ask me questions that I'm like, wow, I'm glad that these questions are being asked. And Dr. Dillon would call me on a regular basis and ask me these hard questions that I know are hard for our partners in this equity journey. So, I mean, nobody would know that, Jeff, unless they actually just talk to you and I, but I want to just bring that out there to show the level of vulnerability and growth mindset with regard to this very, very difficult issue that we face within the ecosystem. So I apologize for interjecting, but I had to highlight you for that.
And no problem. I appreciate that, because it's a heartbeat of mine that, we call ourselves equitable leaders. And then I look at the systems that they provide for students, and it's like, that's not an equitable opportunity. And we do get caught up on the nuances of what we look on at equity today. And what about the Black and brown students that we kind of skipped over that group, and now we're talking about a different group, and which it's disappointing. Maybe it will provide more lens to what we were doing inappropriately for all students that needed equity. Hopefully we'll get to that point, but we have some horrible structures in place around the United States that really, I don't care what you do, there is a structure that's inequitable for students. And here's an example. And and this is one of the drivers for us. If I have a student that's been traveling with their family, working in Texas and in New York, and then, coming to Idaho to help with the hop, harvest in the fall, right? The student's going to pop into school, and they're going to be 2 years behind.
Right.
But how can it be equitable if I put a student that is a fifth grade age student learning maybe at a third grade age reading level, right? Third grade reading level. And I put them in a fifth grade class with fifth grade content and say, learn this. And the kid's like, I can't.
Right.
How is that equitable?
Right.
The student doesn't need fifth grade content. The student needs third grade content. Now, if I pull the student out and label the student and then move them down the hallway, now it's inequitable, right? Because I'm labeling kids,
Right.
because of why, right?
You're getting into history. You're getting into history.
I don't apologize. I'm passionate about it. And I speak the same way no matter where I'm at. I think we have some work to do in education.
That's Dr. Dillon. That's why I love you, and the phone calls that we've had, I think the only thing that Dr. Dillon fails to realize sometimes is that he's on mountain time. So when he's calling me 7, 8 with a great idea after a board meeting, 9 o'clock, it's 11 o'clock over here, but it's all right. I always will take the
It's all
call
good.
from my guy,
It's all
Dr.
good.
Jeff Dillon, right? But Doc, and I want to pull out one example. Right. And it's aligned to the McKinsey study, of course, that you've been, unwrapping those 4 domains, the DEF that you've been familiar with, but your assessment practices, right? Because now they're like, oh, yeah, they've been talking about competency-based learning. They've been talking about these really high level concepts. But I just want to pull out one vertical system of how you moved away from traditional practices to this new innovative competency model where assessments are not just underscoring achievement. So how did you root that in your system? Obviously, you talked about the early stages of getting everybody on board around this common definition of personalized learning, one-to-one instruction, eliminating the misnomer that families have. But how did you do that now to support that with assessments? What did that look like in Wilder, and what does it look like now?
So assessments from formative assessments and summative assessments. So formative assessments for us provide us with, some tools to help bridge the gap for kids to move forward. Every student in our system is truly learning at that zone of proximal development in all capacities. That's where we want to live for that student academically. And we might have, and this is the challenge, right? Does a 3rd grade age student always have to be working at 3rd grade age material? If the student is not, is that a problem?
Right.
We pat ourselves on the back when a 3rd grade age student is reading at 5th grade level. Like that's
Right.
awesome. That's great. But if a student's a year behind, it's like we got to label the student. We've got to, we all these interventions have to come into place, and maybe developmentally that student's not there yet. It has nothing to do with what intervention was provided or lack of intervention provided or et cetera. Maybe that student is just on a different pathway.
Wow.
And so we're okay with that model. We're okay with, let's make sure we're not letting the student slide farther back. Let's continue to work that student forward. And we're all on the same pace moving forward. And really this is really hard for a lot of people to believe, the only date in our system we care about, the only date in education is graduation. That's it. We don't care if it's your 9th grade first semester, 2nd semester. We don't care if it's the 5th grade age or it's the starting the year, the first day of school, the last day. We don't care about any of those dates. We only care, have we prepared the student for the date of graduation?
When they walk in,
look at.
yeah, when they walk in and when they walk out, when they walk in and when they, I tell you, when you think about that, right? And I had the unique honor, and I say this, right? And when you brought that phrase, was that I had the honor to start the education pathway of my son. Right. And I will never, everybody says, what is one monumental moment in your education career? And it had nothing to do with, linear metric outcomes. You and I can boast about that anytime. Not about any awards. Obviously, it's about the families that we service. It's about the students, ensuring that they are, prepared for whatever pathway they choose. But one is this other one is purely selfish, is because, having that opportunity to start my son educationally, right? Because like you said, when the day they come in and then the day they leave, I was able to start that for the day that he came in, handed it off to somebody else, but obviously that's what we that's what we it was the handoff. Everybody asked me the question, and Doc, we talk about it. Right now, maybe I'm going to put the shoes back on. Maybe I will join the club again, but right now I'm having too much fun with this, Doc. But last question, last question. But I love that when they come in and when they come out, and different pathways, acknowledging that every student is not going on the same pathway. But Doc, 3 words. Every episode, I have failed to limit each participant or guest, right? 3 words. I mean, we have people now up to 3 times 30, 3 times 300. They just can't limit it to 3 words. And when they say that they don't.
So I've got 3 words, buddy. I got 3 words.
Listen, the most innovative superintendent in the country limited to 3 words. I don't know, but 3 words, Doc, on excellence, equity, and transforming your learning organization to be culturally relevant, because essentially high population of transient students. A lot of those transient students marginalize student groups, EL students, right? Latino and Latina students as well. So you were able to design this model based off of your core principles of who you are and your why. But how do we do that? How do we start shaping that in 3 words, especially with students that are coming from high poverty concentrations?
All means all. I said it before, right? And that's truly, I read mission statements and vision statements of school districts talk about all students. That's not true. When you say all students, but you better mean all students.
Absolutely.
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, and that's it. You're a rule follower, but you're not a rule follower in education. Oh man, I tell you, that's why, Doc, I was just kind of hesitant, and I was like, wait, is he going to go on? And he just was like, nope, all means all. So, folks, a rule follower on the Voices for Excellence podcast, but in the real world, he is not a rule follower. He don't want to retool. He doesn't want to reschool. He wants to de-school. So, Dr. Jeff Dillon, it is such an honor, my friend, to have you on Voices for Excellence. Happy New Year. Please continue to do the work for kids. And it's obviously evident in your work. So I appreciate you being on the show today.
Dr. Carn, thank you for our friendship, partnership, and the focus that you and I both have for excellence in education for all students. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dillon. And on that note, from Wilder, Idaho, and yes, Dr. Dillon took me whitewater rafting, and it was, and look, I'll tell you this too. It was scary for a brother, not a ER, for a BROTHA, a brother, right? But Dr. Dillon, that was something that I will always remember. Whitewater rafting in Idaho. My friend, thank you. And on that note, everybody, thank you for attending tonight's show. Onward and upward. Have a great day.